My mother is Entiat and Lakes. Lakes is over at Kettle Falls, goes into British Columbia. And my father is Wenatchee and Methow. So the uniqueness about my family is we live on the last piece of Indian land in the Methow. And I was charged to guard that as a 12-year-old by my grandfather. And it's work. It takes a lot of reaching out to a lot of people and staying on top of things. The part I got involved with HomeStream was basically from instruction I got in spiritualism, arguably one of the most powerful medicine men in the Northwest when I was in college, and taught me a lot of basically spiritual exercises. And we dedicated a park in Pateros, which within a short time we realized was haunted. And it was those old spirits from the Methow and the Columbia at Pateros. So if we fast forward that, Phil and Kathy, in the conceptions of HomeStream here, contacted me for, I guess, a little spiritual consulting. And the concept for HomeStream was coming home, in their mind, coming home of the salmon. And inside I start laughing because they didn't really know, besides the salmon, who was all going to come home. This place is haunted as well. So we did a sunrise service when we dedicated the park to invite those ancestors back to this site, back to this valley. The Indians were driven out of this valley when they were finding minings and resources. And I would say it's probably been in the last 20 years that there was ever a welcoming feeling for Indian people to be back in the Methow. The demographics, how people are here now, has changed. And that's a good feeling. My job is to hopefully keep welcoming Methows back to the Methow. And so reaching out to other people to invite them that it's okay to come to the Methow. We're still here. My interactions with different activities, I wound up getting to meet Dan. And Dan came to the Methow with his canoe to come to my salmon bank to help me. And that's kind of how I started a really closer relationship with Dan. And so when Dan was coming here, I told him I would do whatever I could to help him succeed in his projects with the help of the people in the Methow. So that's kind of why, and then Dan asked if I would speak to you today. So Dan can tell you about his project with youth and stuff and cultural stuff. And I'm thinking of, what do I tell you so you can inside feel that? Feel my tobacco offering. Feel the things that are spiritual about this place. So I decided to tell you a story about food because of my interaction with Rob Crandall in the Native Plants Project. I want to give you a sense for food and what they need. So we're used to the concept of people saying, you are what you eat. But we stop short there because we think it's nourishment. We think it's to keep our body going. And I want you to think beyond that because it's actually feeds your inner spirit as well. It's important. So it's not just the food that keeps you alive, that food is actually what gives you that inner spiritual being. It's important. So growing up, my grandfather had this big, huge garden that as a little kid, one of your first chores is to weed a garden, and I hated that with passion. It's probably why I don't have a garden today. But we had this huge garden, and we could have never eaten all that food. As a 12-year-old, my grandfather sent me to the river to catch 6 fish. They were steelhead, so I went and I caught the 6 fish. He taught me to flay them, how to prep them, how to smoke them. The old way. So my grandmother was always like this little beaver of activity. Canning, drying. We're harvesting the garden. I'm smoking fish. My grandmother's taking these apple boxes because we had an orchard, and she's putting canned vegetables, canned meat, canned fish, vegetables, dried fruit, berries, camas bulbs, and lastly, my smoked steelhead. And then we put it all in the back of my grandfather's pickup, and we started at Brewster, and we traveled to Omak, giving out these boxes of food. I later realized we were taking food to old Methow people that couldn't come to the valley. They couldn't harvest food, they couldn't fish, they couldn't hunt, they couldn't gather materials. We were bringing them those gifts. And so I was learning a lot, and it was going pretty well until we got to the mouth of the Chilloust, and this old lady lived in a little cabin, and she was a Charlie. And the Charlies lived on the Chilloust and came over the Chilloust to the Methow. So she was Methow, but spent her winters on the Okanagan because, oh, by the way, winter is a lot nicer in Okanagan than it is in Twist. So while he's talking to her, she unwraps the steelhead and pops it in her mouth and starts eating the fish. And she starts crying. And I look like a deer in the headlights because I did something wrong with this fish to make this old lady cry. And she's talking to me in Indian, which I don't understand. She's talking to my grandfather, and I'm in a panic because I screwed up the fish somehow. And she beckons me over, she grabs my hands, and she kisses my hands and pulls my head down and kisses my forehead, and she's still crying. And I'm scared. I really messed this thing up. My grandfather starts laughing, and he says, "Sonny, she's telling you your fish made her spirit young again. When she was young and she could come to the Methow, she could fish, she could gather berries, roots, cedar. You made her young again by that fish." So it was like this kind of awakening of that garden that I hated my grandfather had was really, really important. Not to me, but to those old people that couldn't come to this valley anymore. The epilogue of that story is within a year that old lady died. And I felt really sad because I had this connection with this old lady. And my grandfather looks at me and he says, "Sonny, don't be sad. Because that lady's trip to the other side will have been easier because you gave her a young spirit to take on that journey." That young spirit came from that fish, the berries, the roots. So it's like all this stuff is interconnected. It's not just your body the food's nourishing, it's your spirit as well. And that's why the uniqueness of this valley. And I get to say it's unique because I am Methow, but the uniqueness of this valley is literally why you people live here. But you're connected spiritually to this valley as well because you're gathering and eating foods that are here and you're getting water from this watershed. And that's what spiritually makes us strong and connected. You don't have to be Indian to feel that. That's kind of the message I wanted to leave with you today, is to think about nothing happens in isolation. That's why HomeStream's here, is to teach you about the salmon. We invited ghosts. They're here as well. Pay attention to your environment and the ancestors. I'm working with Michelle with the Montessori school. We're going to do a program. My pet project next with Phil's help is we're doing spirit easements. And the model for it is a big footprint to signify our ancestors and walking them back and remembering the teachings they left with us. And then that's also going to have a little footprint to signify the future. That we teach our children, the children of this valley, to take those old teachings and go forward. So, thanks a lot for listening.